welcome back here, Bruce. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Jerry.
So the G7, we'll start with that. We'll go in chronological order here. What was your take on what Trump attempted to do there?
Well, I think it's part of his larger program that the so-called rules-based international order that, the other side is hysterical over Trump dismantling needs to be reformed. It has evolved into a transnational institution to which we cede some of our sovereignty, and that functions usually as a mechanism for other states to pursue their economic and other self-interests at the expense of ours. And that covers NATO, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all of these basically progressive ideas that nationalism is somehow dangerous and responsible for the catastrophes of the 20th century, and you need to have a technocratic elite through these institutions running the show. And Trump has intuited or understood, I don't know which, that this isn't really serving America's interests or security that well. So to me, he went to the G7 to say, this has to be reformed. Just as he's telling China on tariffs, this has to be reformed. You're supposed to be our allies, yet there's an imbalance in our trade. You have tariff rules that benefit you, but that don't benefit us. And we should change this. And I think that's a much needed shift in American leadership, which under both parties has simply accepted the need for these sorts of transnational institutions and not remembering that their job is to tend the interests and security of the citizens of the United States. So I thought that was great, and the insult of our Canadian Prime Minister to the North, a good slap down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Trudeau is, I don't know if he's trying to act macho or that he's so with it that he knows better, whether he's going back to his globalist collectivist roots that he kind of learned on his father's lap.
Exactly.
But he's really a bad actor, isn't he?
Well, I would say that there's a almost reflexive shamelessness that I don't think these guys even know, that when you spend a mere 1% of GDP on your military, as Canada does, which means that our taxpayers are subsidizing your security, and this goes for the other G7 members, then to maintain this sort of imbalances in trade and tariffs, and then to try and scold our leaders about their attempts to rectify that imbalance, it's shameful. I mean, this so-called, international rules-based order since World War II, that has been the result of the American dynamic economy and American military spending. And this extends to NATO also, who still aren't getting on board with what they themselves established as a 2% minimum GDP on defense. They talked big, but if you look at the latest figures, they're on the NATO website, they're still not there yet. And I don't think they are, because it's not in their interest. It's in their interest to have us subsidize their defense so that they can spend money on what is in their interest. And we've been allowing this imbalance and this double standard for too long, and it's time to put everybody on notice that there's going to be some changes, and that we are going to, again, put our interests and security at the top of the list.
So what about the response of the globalists and the Democrats that Trump is destroying our alliances, that he's mistreating our enemies, and he's at the same time, I should say, he's mistreating our allies, and at the same time he's sitting down, breaking bread with our enemies? What do you have to say about that one?
Listen, sometimes your friends and your allies and even your family need a come to Jesus moment. They need a wake-up call. And it's the responsibility of our leader and commander-in-chief to administer those correctives. That doesn't mean he's bailing on the whole suite of, institutions. So that's a hysterical exaggeration. What he's doing, as I said, is saying we're going to reconfigure it so that it is more balanced. And remind you that given our role in allowing the global economy to function by protecting the sea lanes, et cetera, you really need to start carrying more of your own weight in this collective enterprise and not just assume that we're always going to be there to make sure Iran doesn't close the Straits of Hormuz, which it doesn't because we have a couple of aircraft carriers in the vicinity, and the whole EU has maybe one or two, which rarely go out to sea and do anything. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's just the hysterical reaction of the never Trump of both parties, and I don't pay it any mind anymore because every time they indulge this, they're giving the Republicans free advertising of why the voters should not vote for Democrats.
Yeah.
So as for the second point, which is, this is really, really preposterous because we had an alliance with one of the greatest mass murderers in history, Joseph Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just, like Churchill. Churchill's attitude with Stalin was, well, you're a rat, but we have to do business with you. Go back and look at FDR's warmth for Joseph Stalin, calling him Uncle Joe, saying to his Secretary of State, well, we got to, we've got to give in to Stalin. We have to, give him a little slack and everything. So, this complaining about a few nice things that Trump said to us, petty tin pot dictator like Kim Jong-un, I mean, that doesn't stand comparison to what Stalin did. And then Kennedy and Kissinger and Nixon, they had to go make nice with probably the world's history's greatest mass murderer, Mao Zedong.
Mm-hmm.
Were they supposed to go and start scolding him and telling him what a rat he was? Of course not. These guys always talk about, well, we have to have diplomacy. Well, part of diplomacy is pretending to be polite to somebody because you're after something greater. You're not going to start the diplomatic negotiation by alienating them, by giving them sermons. So this whole business, again, Kerry, this is just the reflexive, unthinking, hysterical reaction of people who are seeing their cherished worldview and their superior place in it being challenged. And like most children, they don't like it.
Mm-hmm. So as far as where we're heading, the alliance seems to be shifting to Eastern Europe, countries that understand the threats to freedom, that have been enslaved in the past by the former Soviet Union, all these things. And the Western Europeans seem bent on self-immolation with immigration and everything else. And then you have like Italy electing a populist government, basically shutting off access to the so-called immigrants and saying we're going to deport 500,000 of them. Does this represent a tipping point for Western Europe?
Well, I think we're on the way to that. And you remember during the Iraq War under Bush, when I think it was Rumsfeld talked about old Europe and new Europe. Mm-hmm. So this has been developing since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe was finally, had sovereignty and self-governance and could, rule themselves according to their history and their culture and their mores. And the West doesn't like it either. But I think this is just one more sort of step in the disintegration of the EU, not its total collapse, I don't think, but its reconfiguration to maybe a northern European Union. I don't know what they're going to do because financially not in great shape, with the exception of Germany, of course. So we're watching a process unfolding that, I doubt is going to reach its tipping point for some time, but it's definitely coming. Unless the European economies, the Northern European economies, can reform once again and get a grip on this immigration nonsense, I don't see it changing. Let's don't forget, when we're talking about Eastern Europe, it wasn't just the Soviet Empire they were brutalized by. It was the Ottoman Empire as well, the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. So they're very sensitive in their historical memory to opening the floodgates to more Muslims from the Middle East, because they have experience with Muslims from their East coming into their countries, and the unpleasant experiences they had. So it's really arrogant of the Western Europe to dismiss those historical memories. They're part of what make us what we are. So I think in general, Kerry, the whole technocratic, top-down, democracy deficit idea of governing, which comes from the progressive movement, and is leftist in origins, and is totally contrary to our traditions, particularly of self-rule and federalism and state sovereignty and individualism. I think it's under great stress, and I think a lot of the hysterical reaction to Donald Trump reflects this sense on the global anti-Trumpers, that this very nice sort of order or model that they have profited from is under attack. And I say that's a good thing. I'm glad they feel that way.
Yeah, well, it's not happy days for them. And it's so brilliant reaching out to the Eastern European allies, because they're not afraid to fight. Hey, so moving on, switching gears, we had the historic summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un, and it looked like little Rocket Man there was eating out of Trump's hand. He was like guiding him along. That's what it looked like. I was wondering if he was calling him, grasshopper while he was in the midst of the summit. And I'm sure he was holding out a McDonald's and a trip to Mar-a-Lago and playing golf with Trump as the next step. You optimistic, Bruce?
No. Here, I think that a lot of the, coverage from the conservative media is a little bit intemperate, and that we need to be more cautious. North Korea has been doing this for a long time, and you can go back and look at the history of these previous summits and meetings. It's historic in the sense that an American president met with him. That's right. But at this point, that's nothing but PR, or that's nothing but window dressing. First, we have to see what concrete material concessions is North Korea going to make, because they have done this over and over, and they've been rewarded with nuclear reactors for peaceful uses, of course, food, etc., all kinds of inducements, and then they've turned around and they've reneged on whatever agreement they made, and that's a matter of historical record. So, given that track record, I would hold off the Nobel Prize nominations at this point. The second point is, it seems to me that what this is really about is China and the United States. And I think it's pretty clear that Kim Jong-un is not going to do anything that Xi doesn't want him to do. And that this is part of the relationship of China and the United States. So what we really have to be thinking about is, what is China up to? What does China want? Are they counseling or coercing Kim into making nice, because that takes some of the heat off of the impending trade war with the United States and tariffs? And interfering with China's aim to make the South China Sea what the Gulf of Mexico is to us. We don't see any Chinese battleships cruising the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a very complicated three-way negotiation. One held, for the cameras, and the other one going on behind the scenes. So I think we need to wait and see how this develops.
Yeah, well, I will grant you that we don't know how this is going to work out yet. But, North Korea has always been a protectorate of China's, or Korea has. And I think that perhaps Kim Jong-un is tired of being a puppet, and he's playing a little bit off against China as well. So, yeah, I think it's legitimate.
Well, yeah.
I think it's legit.
Yeah, it's three ways, and that makes it much more complex. It's Kim's relationship with China, our relationship with Kim, and our relationship with China, and the perception of each what those other relationships are. So that's why, just making the state visit. Listen, I'm happy that he did that. If only because it is driving the Never Trump so-called resistance crazy, and anything that does that makes votes for Republicans, and I'm all for it. But from a wider perspective, we've been down this road of great expectations, and then once more see nothing come of it. But we're at the point now that we can't continue what's been happening for 30 years. We can't continue this game of playing Charlie Brown to Kim Jong-un's Lucy. You know the old gag. Lucy baits Charlie Brown into trying to kick the football, and then at the last second she jerks it away. So again, I wouldn't make a prediction or a bet, but hopefully keep our eye on it and see what transpires.
Yeah. Well, I'm optimistic about it. I think this is the real thing. But hey, keep an open mind, see what's going to happen, because we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, do we? Exactly.
That's, particularly with China. I mean, China's a master of keeping its real intentions sort of close to the vest. But remember, North Korea without China collapses. It would have collapsed a long time ago, decades ago. China keeps it going for its own reasons. So we have to really make this all a part of how we are reforming or correcting, or however you want to put it, our relationship with China.
Right. Yep, agreed. Trust but verify. But I think this is a major turning point. Look, we were talking about nuclear conflagration 6 months ago. Now they're sitting down and meeting. And the idea of meeting in Singapore, I think, is very significant because it is, dominated by ethnic Chinese, the Singapore economy, but it's still a free country, a city-state. It's super advanced. So there's a symbolism there of Kim Jong-un looking to bridge the gap, if you will, bring North Korea into the modern age. And I think...
Well, And I've been thinking that, look, China has been able to modernize its economy and become richer, but still holding on to autocratic rule. And it seems to me that somebody in China is sitting down telling Kim Jong-un, look, you don't have to, protect yourself the way you have been. You can do it the way we did. You can lie and obfuscate while you bring in foreign investment. You liberalize a little bit, but the power's always in your hands. And you don't need the possession of nuclear weapons to do that. Because you've got the big brother to your east. And I don't see why, and maybe somebody more knowledgeable could tell me why, China couldn't tell Kim, look, ship all of your your missiles, your warheads, right? Send it across the border to us. That way, if you get to the point and relations deteriorate and you think you need them, you'll have them. Now, Kim probably wouldn't want to do that, but again, China has so much leverage.
Yeah. Without China, North Korea is toast for sure. It's a fascinating situation here, but I am very optimistic. I don't know if you caught the interview with Chris Cuomo and Dennis Rodman, but according to what he says, Kim has been reaching out for many years, wanting to change the state of affairs. And, Rodman's a little flaky, I will grant you, and, who the heck knows. But I think there was some sincerity there on his part. And for some reason, Kim Jong-un is the only one, Rodman's the only one that he's reached out to. This is fascinating in and of itself because the guy is a weirdo, but yet Trump, before they went to the summit, I guess he had his intelligence people there. He was there, Pompeo, trying to figure out what the real deal is with Kim Jong-un, which, a lot of times celebrities are the only ones that can ever really connect with these autocratic rulers because normal people are just never really going to have the opportunity. So that was fascinating too.
Yeah, it is. But remember, historically, usually those kinds of informal ambassadors, let's call them, end up being the chumps of whoever invites him. And the great example of this is Charles Lindbergh in the late 1920s. I mean, he was an international celebrity, and the Luftwaffe had him to Germany touring Potemkin, aircraft manufacturing plants. And then Lindbergh would go to Whitehall or Paris and say, "Hey, you guys, you into what their air power is it's so advanced that they can destroy you without ever your armies grappling." And that figured into the thinking of Neville Chamberlain when he went to Munich.
Yeah, so he was a useful idiot, Lindbergh.
Exactly.
And perhaps Rodman is too. Can't take him too seriously, but he does have a relationship with the guy for whatever. Anyway, Bruce, we got to run now. Where's the best place to find your latest writings?
Front Page Mag.
All right.
And they've also got a really good archive, so that's the most efficient way.